In the spring of 2023, a woman named Dana, a 33-year-old middle school teacher in Columbus, Ohio, opened an email from her bank. The subject line said, "Great news about your savings rate." She had $14,000 in that account. Not a fortune, but it was 2 years of careful living, skipping vacations, brown bagging lunch, saying no to things that cost money. She was proud of it, and now the bank was telling her she'd be earning 4.7%. For the first time in her adult life, the system felt like it was working for her. She felt, finally, like a responsible adult. I want to tell you what happened to Dana's money next, because what a bank actually does the moment your deposit clears, the math they don't put in the subject line, is one of the most clarifying things I've found in this research. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. My name is Capt Liquid. I research the systems that move money, who designs them, who they serve, and what they cost the people who never read the fine print. This is Research Report 01, and we're starting with the thing sitting in almost every bank account in America right now. I'm calling it the 5% illusion.
Here is the contradiction that started this investigation. Between 2022 and 2023, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates 11 times, to their highest levels in over 2 decades. Banks responded by advertising high-yield savings accounts at 4%, 4.5%, 5%. Financial media celebrated. Personal finance influencers declared victory. For the first time in 15 years, the savings account was back. And yet, every piece of data I examined told me that regular Americans were falling further behind, not catching up. Consumer credit card debt crossed $1.27 trillion in late 2025, the highest on record, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. People were borrowing more at the exact moment they were supposedly being rewarded for saving. How does a generation earn more on their savings than ever before and still end up deeper in debt than ever before? That is the puzzle. The answer is not mysterious. It is math that nobody is putting on a billboard. So let's do the math. To understand what's happening to your savings account today, you need about 60 seconds of history. For 15 years, from 2008 to 2022, the Federal Reserve held interest rates near zero. Banks paid you almost nothing to hold your money. A savings account earned 0.01%, 0.06%, rounding errors. Over a decade and a half, the average American was quietly trained to stop thinking of their savings account as a financial tool and start thinking of it as a waiting room, somewhere to park money until you needed it. Then inflation hit, hard. The Fed raised rates sharply. Suddenly, banks could afford to pay you something, and they did. Partly because they had to compete for deposits, and partly because it was brilliant marketing. The great news email went out. Dana got hers. Millions of people moved money into high-yield savings accounts, feeling like they'd finally caught a break. What nobody explained in that email was the other side of the ledger, the side where the bank takes your money and immediately puts it to work at rates that make 5% look like a rounding error. A bank is not a vault. Discard that image entirely. A bank is an arbitrage machine. Arbitrage means buying something cheap and selling it expensive. Your deposit is the cheap part. JPMorgan Chase, the largest bank in the United States, recorded $58.5 billion in net income for 2024, record revenue for the 7th consecutive year,
a return on tangible equity of 20%. Let's trace exactly how your $10,000 becomes part of that number. Your $10,000 deposit earns you $450 a year. In the same 12 months, the bank takes that same $10,000, lends it to someone carrying a credit card balance, and collects $2,230. They keep $1,780 in pure margin. And they carry nearly zero risk because your deposit is federally insured by the FDIC. The government guarantees your deposit. The bank carries no risk, and yet they keep 80% of the return and you keep 20%. That is not an accident. That is the design. But the spread is only the first layer. There are two more holes in the bucket, and this is where the research gets personal. Hole 1. The tax reality. The IRS classifies savings interest as ordinary income, taxed at your marginal rate. According to IRS 2025 tax tables, a household earning $75,000 sits in the 22% federal bracket. Add a median state income tax of approximately 5%, your $450 in gross interest becomes roughly $330 in your pocket. Your advertised 4.5% yield is now effectively 3.3%. Hole 2. The inflation gap. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported headline CPI at 2.7% at the close of 2025. But headline CPI is an average across hundreds of categories, including things most people rarely buy. The BLS's own subcategory data shows hospital services up 6.7%, natural gas up 10.8%, electricity up 6.7%, and food away from home up 4.1% for the same period. For a working adult in a major metropolitan area, real cost of living pressure ran closer to 4 to 5%. Dana's $14,000, sitting in a high-yield account, earning what her bank's marketing team called great news, lost purchasing power over the course of the year. She did everything right. She saved. She moved to the best option her bank offered. She fell behind anyway. If you found out that the route you were running was actually a treadmill, that no matter how fast you went, you'd end up where you started, would you keep running it? Here is what the research consistently finds about how high net worth individuals actually hold cash. They don't optimize for yield, they optimize for velocity. And there is a meaningful difference between those two things. The difference, I'd argue, between a pond and a river. A pond holds more water than a river at any given moment, but the river does something a pond cannot. It moves. It generates energy. It reaches the ocean. A pond left untouched evaporates, grows stagnant, shrinks. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the most comprehensive study of American household wealth, documents a consistent pattern. Households in the top wealth quintile hold dramatically less cash as a percentage of assets than middle-income households. They don't keep a $500,000 pond. They keep a $50,000 river, moving capital deliberately from one productive position to the next, never letting it sit long enough for inflation to take its cut. And there is a third hole in Dana's bucket. The research calls it opportunity cost. While her $14,000 sat earning 4.5%, the S&P 500 returned over 20% in 2024, documented by Standard & Poor's annual index data. Short-duration Treasury funds returned 5.4 to 5.4% with comparable liquidity. The price of productive assets moved at a completely different speed than her savings account. Every year that gap widens, the distance between where she is and where she wants to be grows. Not because she's doing anything wrong, but because the system she's in was designed with a different destination in mind. The bank's 5% is not a reward, it is a fee you pay for not moving. They pay you just enough to keep your money still because they know, as a structural feature of fractional reserve banking, documented in every Federal Reserve educational publication on the subject, that moving money is where wealth is generated. They move your money all day, every day, at 22.3%. They pay you 4.5% to stay on the couch. This channel doesn't give financial advice. I'm a researcher, not an advisor. What I can present is what the data consistently documents about how people in this situation typically respond. What you do with that is your decision entirely. Finding 1. Most people have never calculated their real savings yield. Financial literacy research, including studies published by the TIAA Institute and the National Bureau of Economic Research, documents consistently that the majority of Americans cannot accurately estimate their after-tax, after-inflation return on savings. The calculation is not complex. Gross interest minus your effective tax rate minus your real cost of living increase. The result is a number most people have never seen written down. The research finds that the act of calculating it, making the real number visible, is the most common trigger for a reassessment of savings strategy among middle-income households studied. Finding 2. Wealth-building literature consistently documents a two-bucket cash pattern. Across the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, Vanguard's annual How America Saves report, and Fidelity's household savings research, a recurring behavioral pattern emerges among households that grow wealth relative to peers. A defined, limited short-term liquidity reserve, typically 1 to 3 months of essential expenses, and everything beyond that deployed into assets with inflation-beating return characteristics. The research does not prescribe a universal buffer size. It varies significantly by employment stability, income regularity, and household circumstances. But the pattern of separating true emergency liquidity from long-term idle cash appears consistently in the wealth-building literature across decades of data. Finding 3. High-rate consumer debt mathematically dominates all other variables. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's research on household net worth trajectories and supporting literature from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York identifies high-rate revolving debt as the single largest drag on middle-income wealth accumulation. The arithmetic is mechanical. No savings vehicle or investment category available to retail participants currently offers a guaranteed return that exceeds 22.3%. The Federal Reserve's documented average credit card APR for accounts accruing interest in Q3 2025. The research literature on household financial recovery almost universally documents high-rate debt elimination as the behavioral pattern that precedes meaningful wealth accumulation. The data is the data. Dana's bank told her the news was great, and by one definition it was. 4.7% is more than 0.5%. But the bank's definition of great is not your definition of free. It's not your definition of ahead. The bank needs you to hold still. The research on wealth accumulation suggests a different direction entirely. The next report is about the second anchor, bigger, older, and far more emotional than a savings account. We're going to follow the real math on homeownership, the total cost, the liquidity trap it creates, and who actually profits when someone buys into what the marketing calls the American dream.
I'm Captain Liquid.
Stay liquid.